An older gentleman walks to the front desk at midnight asking for a room. I give him the details and check him in. He seemed normal and quite cordial. The gentleman goes to his room and a few hours later comes down to the front desk and asks me if I knew where to score some ecstasy. I told him no, and he storms off out of the hotel room, mumbling to himself, saying he wants to kill me. Now, I don't feel endangered by this guy, as I have a weight-height advantage on him, and know how to handle myself in a fight, thanks to being trained by my ex-Marine brother. This guy comes back to the hotel a few hours later, in a much better mood. Me, on the other hand, am scared shitless. He comes strolling in wearing a thick sheriff's outer jacket and a sheriff's hat, kind of like Carl from The Walking Dead. He asks me if I have a girlfriend, and I reply yes. He tells me to dump her because women are evil. He then tells me the story of heartbreak and his revelation. This guy, he went to prison for beating his ex-wife in a rage after finding out she cheated on him. He had a revelation while in prison. The best experience was making love to a man, and that women were the devil. This guy then warns me to dump women and consider men. I apologize to him and tell him how I'm straight, and I thank him for the story. He then walks away, saying to reconsider and not to knock it until I try it. Once he left, I call 911 and ask if anyone is missing a jacket and hat. They say that they will check the on-duty officers and will call back. Well, they call back and ask me if the person was staying at the hotel. I confirm with them his details and description. They inform me to keep away from him and that he took a brick to a window of a cruiser. The officer was on his lunch nearby, doing paperwork, and stole a taser, jacket, hat, and club. A few minutes later, the hotel was surrounded. Officers ask for his room number and an override key. I provide all the information and the officers race to his room. There they find him watching adult movies, sodomizing himself with that club. They came out with this guy cuffed. He yells to me on the way out to reconsider his belief of women. Surprisingly, his credit card went through for the charges. My grandmother's entire life, she had a reoccurring nightmare. In this nightmare, she would be walking down a long dark hallway, turn to the left, open a door, and see something terrible. She'd always wake up before seeing what it was, though. In her 40s, she, her husband, my dad, and my aunt were on vacation. They booked a hotel at the last minute, so they ended up having to get 2 rooms with 2 twin beds on opposite sides of the floor. My dad wakes up at around 3 a.m. and can automatically tell something's not right. He calls out into the darkness, "Dad?" No response. He turns on the bedside light. "Dad?" he says, a little louder this time. Still no response. Getting worried, he slides out of the bed and shakes his father. He doesn't wake up. My dad ran down the hotel hallway to my grandmother's room and started banging on the door. My grandma worriedly opens the door and my dad shouts, "Something's wrong with Dad." He leads her down the hallway, a long hallway, to the last door on the left. My grandmother reaches the door, turns to the left, and sees her husband dead in bed. A heart attack. She never had the dream again. When I was around 18 or so, I had been living in a hotel with my mother and sister. We had lost most of our house to a fire 2 years prior, and had been living at an extended stay temporarily. We chose this particular hotel because of its location. It was rather close to our school and to where Mother worked at the time, so it seemed like the right choice. Now, what makes this location so interesting is the fact that it's located in the Meadowlands, famous for housing Giant Stadium, now Meadowlands Stadium. For those of you who aren't familiar with the setting, the Meadowlands are mostly swamps and marsh fields. Way back when, before redevelopment on the area began, it was mostly pig farms. So it's safe to say that if you were up to no good and needed something to get rid of, you went here. Hazardous materials, broken down vehicles, even bodies were left to rot in the murky waters of various swamps. Mostly considered to be the perfect place for murders and rapes. It's even rumored that Al Capone's body is buried somewhere out there. So with that little bit of back history, I now continue on with my own little tale. I had woken up from what seemed like an average dream, gasping for air. The inhales loud enough to wake my mother, who slept in the bed beside me at the time. After a few minutes, I finally regained my composure. I couldn't figure out why, but I had stopped breathing. My mother turns and asks if I'm all right. I reassure her that everything's fine and tell her to go back to bed. At this point, I'm wide awake, but decide that I need to go back to sleep, since it was rather late and I had class the next day. I lay my head back onto the pillow, and as soon as I feel the cold fabric touch the back of my head, I felt something else that I would never forget. The unmistakable touch of fingers tapping on my forehead. 2 quick taps. It came fast and felt harsh. I quickly rose and scanned the area and saw nothing. My mother and sister were laying down, sleeping. No one else but us 3 were in that room. I began to freak out and turned on all the lights, waking up my family, and they asked me what's wrong. I explained the story to them, but they write it off as a dream. My mother had seemed to have already forgotten that she had already woken up by my odd gasps for air. For the rest of the night, I sat up, leaning across the bed frame, observing the room until my body just couldn't take it anymore. I was too exhausted from lack of sleep and shock to the system that occurred twice in one night. It was ready for bed. But as I sat there, dozing off into a sleep my body was screaming for, I couldn't shake that feeling that something wanted my attention. Used to be a security guard on a campus that was a military fort since the Revolution. It was updated throughout the years and was last used in World War II, which by then the campus was bristling with artillery and earth concrete bunkers, as well as many brick and mortar buildings. When it became a college campus, the barracks, hospital, officer's house, everything was converted to classrooms and dorms. There was one building on campus, a hotel, where students learned bartending and hotel services. That was infamous for being haunted. My shift was 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. Starting at midnight, the last coworker left and I had the entire campus to myself. My job was to make sure everything was locked and lights were off, and to scare off any drunks or potheads trying to get into the old concrete bunkers. But that hotel, it rarely had any living guests. I would go through the building and turn off the lights, only to turn around an hour later and see a light on again. I would stand in the hotel lobby after patrolling and confirming I was alone, and hear things moving on the floor above me. I heard a chain dragging across the room above me, then a distant scream. One night I had another officer with me for once. We were talking in the lobby about the temperature dropping, and then we heard a little girl giggling. In the basement, I would see shadows dart across the conference room. However, the biggest thing that made me nope out was when I was in the lobby and looked up the staircase. I saw a woman's leg with black shoes walk from the right to left of the floor above, and then straight through a wall. And keep in mind, that's just a hotel. It used to be the officers' quarters. Stories say an officer died of the flu around World War II, and before that man was executed during the Revolution for being accused of being a spy. Like most hauntings, however, I do not know the truth of the stories told. I didn't even talk about the voices I heard in the basement, or shadow people wandering the graveyard in the middle of the campus. Footsteps following me in the darkness. Faces staring at me from the bunker ruins. I miss that place. One of my brothers worked security in one of New York City's most upscale hotels. The security desk received a frantic call during one of his night shifts. A guy was calling, all freaked out that his wife was in the bath and was not breathing. My brother and another security guard rushed upstairs to the room. Sure enough, they found a woman in the tub, and she was unresponsive. My brother and the other guard got her out of the tub and attempted CPR. In the interim, during resuscitation attempts, the NYPD arrived. They told my brother to stop CPR because the lady was obviously dead and, in their opinion, had been for a couple of hours. The husband was questioned extensively. He told law enforcement that he and his wife had a fight earlier in the evening. He went out on his own, and when he came back, his wife was in the bath. He says he went to bed at that point, but later became concerned when his wife didn't come back to the bed. Privately, among all of those present, the general consensus was that the husband had something to do with it, but it could not be proven. A couple of weeks later, the room was again made available to guests, and of course the incident was not mentioned. A woman who frequently stayed at the hotel made a reservation for a week and was assigned to that room. She was the first person to stay in the room since the incident. She came to the front desk first thing in the morning, very upset, and with all of her luggage in tow. She said that she was canceling the rest of her reservation and that she would never be staying at that hotel again. She said that she did not sleep the entire night and that the room was haunted. No one at the hotel had mentioned to her what had previously transpired in that room. While my brother worked there, every guest who stayed in that room called about strange goings-on, and many asked to be switched to another room. I hope you ghouls enjoyed these true, creepy hotel stories. The one that creeps me out the most, I think, I mean, it's not creepy, it's just like the background of it with that woman in the bathtub. Do you think the husband had anything to do with it? I mean, it sounds fishy. Like, I don't know. If they couldn't convict him, boy. But it's nice to hear that background. I like when they give you the background to the hauntings, just like the hotel that was on the campus that used to be a World War II thing. That's interesting. I always like the little mini history lesson that you get sometimes. But have you ghouls ever had like an experience with a haunted hotel? Let me know in the comments below. I have not, unfortunately. But I am curious to see if you ghouls have. As always, the last video will be on the top left. The next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.